Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Healthy Peaceful Podcast. I am so glad you are joining me this week as I continue my series on Ayurveda, an ancient system of wellness from India that truly is meaningful and practical to our modern lives. As you know, the state of well-being in the U.S. is currently not optimal. Much of our healthcare paradigm is based on a we won't fix it until it's broken model, with little emphasis placed on how stress and the accelerated pace of our lives impact our health. Ayurveda is a paradigm which asks us to step up, to consider how every aspect of our lives influences our health. Instead of focusing on disease, Ayurveda attunes us to the subtle imbalances that percolate in our mind and physiology. When we are so attuned, we gain the capacity to align and realign. We become powerful instead of powerless. We gain the opportunity for perfect health. Every week, I explore these principles with a fascinating guest who is on the path, or I share what is resonating with me. Thank you for supporting this podcast and being a co-creator in conceiving of and participating in the new paradigm, the healthy, peaceful world. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Robert Keith Wallace, PhD in physiology from UCLA, a pioneer in bridging ancient Ayurvedic wisdom with modern science to unlock the secrets of longevity and vibrant living. Dr. Wallace is a renowned scientist, author, and educator who has dedicated his career to exploring the intersection of mind, body, and consciousness. He is perhaps best known for his groundbreaking research on the physiology of consciousness and his work in bringing Ayurvedic principles into mainstream understanding. With a PhD in physiology from the University of California, Dr. Wallace's journey into the realm of holistic health began early in his career. He was drawn to the ancient wisdom of Ayurveda, recognizing its profound insights into human health and longevity. In his book that we will be discussing today, 16 Super Biohacks for Longevity, Dr. Wallace delves into practical strategies inspired by Ayurveda to promote longevity and well-being in the modern world. He emphasizes how these time-tested practices align with recent discoveries in modern medical science, such as the microbiome, highlighting the relevance in enhancing both lifespan and quality of life. Throughout his career, Dr. Wallace has been a tireless advocate for integrating ancient wisdom with contemporary scientific understanding. He has conducted extensive research on meditation, stress reduction, and holistic approaches to health, shedding light on the profound impact of mind-body practices on overall wellness. Dr. Wallace's work not only provides valuable insights into extending lifespan, but also emphasizes the importance of living creatively and productively at every stage of life, a principle deeply rooted in Ayurvedic tradition. Join us as we delve into the wisdom of the ages and explore practical strategies for achieving optimum health and vitality with Dr. Robert Keith Wallace. Welcome, Keith.
Hi, nice to see you.
Great. Awesome. So, let me just switch my page on my iPad here and we'll get started. So I want to start out, we're talking about your book, Keith, the 16 biohacks for longevity. I really want to start out with the word biohack and what that word means to you.
Yeah, I like to have some contemporary foot in the door. And so biohack is that kind of new word that's used for anything that improves your health and longevity. And it includes ancient techniques, modern techniques, and there's quite a bit written about it out there. Everybody's interested, but it's something which changes your physiology. Could be food, could be meditation, could be exercise, could be a cold bath, could be anything that changes your physiology. And in this case, we're looking at what are those ancient and modern techniques which can best help you live a healthy and long life.
Awesome. That's great. That's wonderful. I know in your book, you talked about essentially the alarming rise in dementia, not only Alzheimer's, but other types of dementia. You said in your book that 1 in 3 seniors have Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. What do you attribute this to?
Well, if you have to look at it, it's everything. It's, the number one risk factor for cardiovascular disease, for example, is lack of exercise. Diet is hugely important for diabetes, and people consider Alzheimer's as diabetes 3 as opposed to diabetes 1 and 2. Stress, meditation, huge for Alzheimer's. There's just so many factors, supplements. So in the end, it's the accumulation of all those habits that you have in your life. You may go to a doctor and the doctor tells you, oh, you should exercise more, you should eat better, but people don't do it. They rely on medicine. And the problem is there's no medicine for Alzheimer's. So they can take medicine for blood pressure, which has relatively few side effects and can help them. But Alzheimer's right now is without any really effective medicine. And these medicines only just focus on the symptoms. If you were to see what's going on inside the brain, you'd have to say inflammation was the biggest cause. And it's precipitated by everything from high blood glucose levels to all the other aspects that are, the microbiome. Some people talk about the blood-brain barrier getting compromised, this shield that the brain has, and that things can get in, and then a lot of the plaques that people were trying to figure out what, these plaques form. They're kind of conglomerations that gum up the works. And people thought, oh, well, that's just, that's the cause. We'll eliminate those. But it turns out they might be another symptom that, when the microbiome gets upset, these gut bacteria, then something happens to the blood-brain barrier, things creep in, and the brain's own immune system starts attacking. And the result of that attack are these plaques. So it ends up being a mess. And it's all so many factors, it's hard to pinpoint one.
Right. So some of these things that we'll be talking about and that you've addressed in your book could be helpful for continuing to have vital cognitive health as we age. Would that be a correct statement?
Yeah, there's, health span and lifespan. It's not so great to have a long lifespan and not have a good health span. So people need, and it's all prevention. I mean, taking drugs is not a good solution at this point. So ultimately, the younger you can start forming good, healthy habits, that makes all the difference in the world. And compliance with those habits is the key to everything. And in this book,
we're going to talk about that.
Okay.
We're going to talk about compliance. So that's really a key thing.
Yeah.
But I know one of the things you mentioned was that, we have a lot of these modern biohacks, and it's sort of a term of art, but many of them are expensive. And then you talk about some of the ancient biohacks.
Yeah.
Just, and in the introduction of your book, you talk about Ayurveda and TM. And you also talk about that there's a possibility with looking at some of these ancient biohacks. It's important to think about your particular body type, your personality, how you interact with the world.
Yeah. I mean, one of the ones I like, that there was this wonderful Ayurvedic physician who was a super expert on pulse, Dr. Triguna. And I traveled around the world with him, to different countries, meeting prime ministers, health ministers, China, Egypt, all over the world, National Institutes of Health. He took the pulse of one of the directors there and told him he had just passed a kidney stone. The guy was so shocked that he couldn't even believe how he could know that. And Dr. Triguna, one of the simplest things he recommended was walking at sunrise, getting that early morning sunlight. And, when I first heard it, I thought, well, that's very sweet, something that people probably did in the ancient times. And, not so practical if you live in Iowa and it's freezing in the morning in winter. But, I kind of didn't pay much attention to it. And then I started listening to different podcasts and different things. And I realized, oh my God, this turns out to be incredibly important. There's a scientific basis to it. That light coming in, it's a different it has a different quality to it than other light. It's more red and yellow. And we know red light therapy now is a big rage because there's huge research showing how it affects the DNA. But just that early morning sunlight, what it does in the simplest form is it goes, through the eyes, gets up to through a series of nerve passageways, that it sends signals to this suprachiasmatic nuclei in the hypothalamus, this tiny little center in the brain. And there you have the master clock. And that master clock literally synchronizes all the other clocks in the body. And there is a clock in every cell in the DNA. So that's a lot of clocks to synchronize. And we know that when people get out of sync with nature, like shift workers, much higher prevalence of cardiovascular, all kinds of disease. So that is important. And simply this light coming in to this suprachiasmatic nuclei, then it goes to the pineal gland and shuts down melatonin, which is called the sleep hormone. Now that makes it easier for you to go to sleep at night because now that hormone is set on the rhythms of nature. So that's one thing. And then there's a whole other theory that light goes through the skull. It goes, right into the cells. And that light affects the mitochondria, these little power plants in every cell of the body. And there it produces also melatonin, but this melatonin has a totally different function. It's a antioxidant, very powerful if we want to live longer. So here's just one simple thing. I don't know, you ever heard Andrew Huberman? He's a wonderful.
Oh yeah. And actually, I'm so glad I think that's one of his top biohacks.
Yeah, he loves sunlight.
That's in the morning sunlight.
Yeah, and he doesn't,
So
you don't have to get up at sunrise for him, but just getting up when the sun is out in the morning,
sure.
he considers critical.
Right. Well, that's interesting because in your book, you really have just touched upon really three of the biohacks. One is the morning light.
Yeah.
And the morning walk, morning
Right.
light, morning walk. The second one is exercise.
Right.
And then the third one is the daily routine, which is essentially, they're all interrelated, the circadian rhythms.
Yeah, you're right.
So maybe we can just go right into circadian rhythms and why Ayurveda emphasizes the daily routine. Lots of people think, well, this is just a rigid approach to life, but could you speak more clearly on that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, circadian rhythm is something that we keep finding more and more about. A Nobel Prize was given for understanding the genetic mechanisms of it. And over, we see scientific studies that are showing that when you're out of sync with nature, then you have this increase in disease, as I mentioned before. So there's a realization now that circadian rhythms are essential for good health. And they involve light. They involve, many aspects of the environment. So people in our, modern civilization, people stay up late with artificial light. Their sleep habits are all mixed up. And they end up, messing up these clocks. And these clocks have a lot to do with our health. And Ayurveda, thousands of years ago, laid out this ridiculously common sense, simple principle. Go to bed early, like before 10, and get up in the morning early, take this walk, meditate, do a whole series of things. And it's done in a form of habits, and you don't have to think about it. And each of these things contributes to the prevention of disease. And so this series of, steps in the daily rhythm, and they also have seasonal rhythms, that has a very, very positive effect, as we now find out from modern science. Each of these things, in fact, are important factors in longevity, because longevity is not one thing, it's everything. So daily rhythm from the Ayurvedic standpoint is, again, free, simplest thing you can do, and yet having a big impact on every aspect of your life. And once it becomes a habit, you don't even think about it anymore. You just, like brushing your teeth in the morning, you just do it, no problem.
Sure. And in Ayurveda, along with the circadian rhythm and the daily routine, we've got these times of day that Ayurveda talks about. We've got the Vata Pitta Kapha time, and some of our listeners may not know what Vata Pitta Kapha time necessarily is. In a way, that's not so important, but what is important is, what are those times a day, and what are the most significant things that people can be doing during those times a day to align with the daily rhythms?
Yeah, I mean, in the morning, getting up, exercising, that's often a kapha time, and it's just good to help balance kapha. The afternoon, noon is.
And tell me why it's considered kapha time. What are the elements of kapha
It's in
that
their
are
clock. They identify certain hours between this hour and that hour, wherever the sun is, as aligned with these three basic elements, the doshas. And so that knowledge has been there for thousands of years. They know, for example, at noon, it's a very pitta time. Pitta is really good for digestion. So they want the main meal to be during that time when the digestion is the best. And then evening, if you go past.
Is that because pitta really aligns with the element of fire?
Yeah.
And that is the time of day when the sun is the highest. So our agni, or our digestive fire, is the strongest. So we want to try to align our behaviors and our habits with nature's rhythms.
Yeah, they basically see all disease as, at least most disease, not necessarily genetic, but all kind of modern diseases stemming from this improper digestion. And there's many factors that contribute to it, but the most important is the sort of fire of digestion, called agni, as you said. So they do everything to improve agni, because what disease for them is kind of interpreted, it's interesting, as the formulation of something called ama. So when the fire of digestion isn't good, you don't properly digest the food. This improperly digested food can leak into the system and block shrotas, little channels in the body, and cause havoc everywhere. The best equivalent understanding of that is leaky gut syndrome, which used to be something that only chiropractors talked about and nobody believed it. But a lot of top physiologists have explained it as maybe the cause of most disease. And it comes, this guy, Alessio Fasano at Harvard, did all this amazing research showing that, certain people like celiacs, he studied, they're really easy to study for this, and they have this allergy to gluten. And what happens is when the gluten, particle, some subparticle of it, hits a receptor on the lining of the stomach, it releases a substance called zonulin. And zonulin has the effect of loosening the kind of binding that holds the cells together and protects the inside of the gut from the inside of the body. So when that opens up, when zonulin happens, and it happens for a totally different reason, it's a whole other story. But when it opens up, then undigested food and bacteria leak into the bloodstream. Now, the gut has about 70% of the immune system. So when you
Now,
get,
I know you actually have another book
I do.
on the microbiome and on it's the Repair and Digest diet.
There's two books. One is called Gut
Yeah.
Crisis, which really
Right.
goes into this microbiome deeply, and then the
And
rest
I
on
like that book
repair.
very much. It's very practical.
Yeah, and then a diet to help it. I mean, ultimately, you need the gut lining. We've just had bad diets, and
Yeah,
that gut
I
lining.
think um, I'd love to talk about that, and we can certainly do that perhaps in another podcast. But
Okay,
getting back to the daily rhythms and thinking about just the beauty of Ayurveda, this ancient wisdom, and really resetting our biological clock, aligning with nature's rhythms, the
right,
importance of circadian rhythms. Many people will look at the daily routine as, oh, just another thing to do.
right.
But if we just get in sync with some basic things, and that's what I want to touch on. We've got the kapha time, which is early morning, which is 6 to 10, and then we've got the pitta time. And kapha, the elements of kapha are heavy and dense. And then we got pitta time, fire, which is going to be 10 to 2. And then we have vata time, which is 2 to 6. And vata is more movement and energy, creativity. It can also exhibit as anxiety and nervousness, but really the positive and negative qualities. But thinking about the qualities of nature and what we can do in our lives to fully align, what would be the most important thing during kapha time? You mentioned exercise, just getting moving
Right,
and doing some
exactly.
things to okay. And I know it's also in Ayurveda they talk about really getting up before 6 because that's when kapha time comes in. We want to try to get up before 6, try to get up before sunrise. Could you talk about that a little bit and why that's important?
Yeah, I mean, I think that some people do it naturally, and some people have a very hard time. Kapha people, interestingly enough, have a very hard time. They take a long time to get up in the morning. Like if you have a kapha kid, and you're a pitta parent, you're up early. You can't figure out why your kid is taking so long to wake up, but it's in the nature of the child that it's harder for them. They take longer to wake up. And kaphas have this kind of inherent steadiness. They're very happy, but they can be a little slow at sometimes. And so for them, the most important thing is, like you said, activity, getting them moving, being creative. So they need help sometimes. So having a mom that can encourage the kapha kid to get up, take a walk, be active, that keeps the kapha in balance. And when the kapha is in balance, then the bad qualities of kapha don't come out. The bad qualities of kapha are often lethargy. They can be all kinds of psychological qualities like stubbornness. It's very hard to get a kapha kid to change a habit, to adopt a new habit because they like to be fixed in a certain way. So everything you can do to keep one of these doshas balanced improves all other aspects of life.
Right. Yeah. And then the pitta time would really be the 10 to 2. So maybe the most important thing people can do is try to eat their largest meal midday. I mean,
Yeah,
that's a little challenging in our culture.
there's hangry, pitta, when it's out of balance, people get angry, irritable. So very typically people who don't eat their main meal at noon, but skip it, like they're working hard or doing something else, they get irritable and angry, which is, causes a lot of problems. So getting them to do this one simple thing, main meal at noon, can quiet down their emotions enormously.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And so vata time, 2 to 6 in the afternoon. If you had a client and there was one thing that you could suggest that they do during that period of time, what would it be?
Um, I mean, meditate. anything that can ground you. Yoga is good. Anything that Vata's problem is it gets out of balance, you get nervous and anxious. When it's in balance, you're highly creative and enthusiastic. So the key to Vata is being grounded. And so any sort of practice that calms you down, like meditation, like yoga, those are just ideal. Essential oils can be very good. Anything that's grounding is very, very valuable.
Awesome. That's great. And I know in your book, you talk about super habits and you talk about BJ Fogg, who's the author of Tiny Habits, and that he has this habit called the Maui habit, getting up each morning and saying, it's going to be a great day. And then we all know about the practice of gratitude, and people have gratitude journals. Let me ask you a question about that. It's not Ayurvedic. It's more my personal curiosity, what your thoughts are.
Sure.
You know, gratitude in some way, it's sort of like the molecules of emotion. You can write things down, but writing things down to me is different than actually feeling it.
Right. You mean you're talking about mood making? You could mood make gratitude, but not really have gratitude.
Yeah. So do you,
Yeah, I would
what do
agree
you,
with you. I would agree with you. I mean,
what do you think are some of the best practices to
well, I think,
cultivate gratitude?
yeah, I think affirmations have a value. Your self-talk is something that's, everybody's interested in. Are you the inner critic or are you the inner coach? So you can, and you can't change self-talk that easy. This is something that's going on inside you. It's based on your early childhood. It's based on so many things in your life. So if you mood make too much, like, oh, I'm so gratitude and giving and, get up like that, then it just sort of divides the mind. It's not who you are. It doesn't help. On the other hand, if you can just nudge yourself a little in that direction, so you're being a little more positive, you're being a little more of a coach rather than a critic, you're being a little more aware that there's more than just you in creation. There are higher forces, and those higher forces are acknowledged in every religion. And ultimately, by being aware and grateful for the good things in life, that's some practice that was there for thousands of years. It's nothing, why we make it to be a new practice. One of the oldest practices in the world. You acknowledge that spiritual quality of life, and you're grateful for what you have, and you recognize that nature is the best teacher. I think that's a very healthy approach to life because it's proactive. You're not a victim, you're being proactive. You're taking responsibility for your life, but at the same time, you're acknowledging there are higher forces and you're being grateful to those, and you're grateful to people around you. If somebody does something kind to you, I think that's the right approach, is to be grateful. If your family is helping you, if your community is helpful to you. So it's nothing more than kind of positive psychology. And you don't want to take it too far because then it becomes mood making and it divides your mind. But it's very good to have that flavor of life and remind yourself that
Sure.
this is something that
Yeah.
can help you. And
Yeah. I
things
like
like
that. I like you
practicing
use the word,
meditation can help that.
sure. Absolutely. And you use the word nudge. So I like that. It's just,
Yeah.
it's the noticing,
Yeah. It's
and
just
I heard
where
something
you put
recently.
your attention grows stronger. So if you
Sure.
put your attention on the positive and you're grateful for things, that side of you grows stronger rather than the negative side and the complaining side. You don't really want to feed that. You want to feed the positive.
Absolutely. So BJ Fogg, it's going to be a great day. That's his
Yeah,
um,
that works
super
for
habit.
him.
And you talk about the super habit of meditation?
Yeah, most of my research was done on transcendental meditation, and it was done at UCLA and Harvard. And subsequent to that, there have been, literally hundreds and hundreds of studies on it. And in those days, meditation was not a very common word. It was very rare. Now, you have mindfulness, you have so many different techniques out there that are very common. Everybody acknowledges meditation. But I think it's important you have to pick a meditation that's easy. And transcendental meditation, or TM, is easy. So that helps. It's a super habit. And what I've seen in my research is that when you practice transcendental meditation, and it's because it's easy, you tend to be more regular on it, then you get other benefits. It rewires the brain. You can look at the EEG and see all these changes in the brain. And it rewires the brain so that people, they don't always, but there's a tendency to stop bad habits like smoking, drugs, alcohol, and to adopt better habits. So in my mind, that's a huge, huge plus, because anything you can do to improve your daily routine, improve your habits, will make a big difference. And right now, there's so much stress in the world that practicing transcendental meditation is a huge value. I mean, studies have shown how it reduces blood pressure, reduces risk for cardiovascular disease. Almost everybody acknowledges it, but not everybody meditates. They know it, and it's out there now, so common. When I first studied it, it was rare and odd and strange. Now it's, buzzword everywhere. You look on your iPhone and there's, meditation. There's a category sometimes. But
Sure.
do people do it regularly? No.
What do you think the
problem.
stumbling? Actually, that's a good segue into your biohack one, which is the secret of biohacking, is actually developing the habit.
Right.
Because we can talk about all these biohacks like meditation. Everybody knows, or they read about the benefits of meditation. But as you've indicated, many people are not regular with their practice, and it's hard to realize the benefits unless you have that consistent practice.
Yeah.
So, and that's going to be the case with all these habits. So how do we, we've got lots of books on habit change, atomic habits, we've got tiny habits.
Yeah. And they're all good.
And you've been working on it.
They're good books. And, the interesting thing is Ayurveda had a lot of that same knowledge thousands of years ago. They're kind of borrowing, which is fine, and reformulating it in terms of Ayurveda. Like Ayurveda would say, simplest and most important thing is start small, take small steps. Now, that's the title, Tiny Habits. James Clear's real, he makes in Atomic Habits the same notion. Start small, something doable, something specific, something that's easy, because you have to gain confidence. So our program really takes from Ayurveda, but is very similar to other programs out there.
Now Keith, you talk about your program. What are you referring to?
I'm referring to the program in the book of habit change. So it's
okay. So just I know there's some other online courses as well, so that's why I asked that question.
Yeah, there's a whole new program, superuhabits.com. These ideas, I've been able to, co-create some new programs with other people on this. And so it's getting out there. But it is Ayurveda. Now, the advantage, why do this habit change program rather than Atomic Habits or Tiny Habits? The knowledge of Ayurveda has this huge base to it, which is everything has to be personalized. So a Vata person can quickly learn a habit and can quickly move on to something else and not continue the habit. Pitta person's wonderful. Most of these books on habit change are written by Pitta people for Pitta people, because they love to make to-do lists. They love to adopt new habits, but they can also they can overdo it. They can have, 10 habits they're trying at the same time because they're so super achievers. And then there's the kaphas who can't even get started. They're very fixed in their way. They really need help. So our program adds Ayurveda.
Now
to
you,
habit
you
change.
referred to, in Ayurveda, they refer to the Vata Pitta Kapha. So you're indicating that the difference in your program and what you're advocating that people really consider in your book is that Ayurveda is important because you can read a book on habit change, but if they haven't considered the energy state or the personal nature of that individual, what we call the dosha in Ayurveda, um, then it could be doomed for failure.
Yeah,
Um,
it's it.
but there's more likelihood of success
Right,
if we consider these energy states, these doshas that
right,
people loosely fall into. We're a combination of all three,
right.
but are predominant doshas. And you said the Vata person, what will help the Vata person actually implement positive change?
Yeah, it
And what
essentially.
is a Vata person? Describe the
Well,
general attributes.
they're very creative. They're very dynamic. They're often in marketing or advertising, artists, musicians, and they're full of new ideas. But the problem is that if they get out of balance, then they can go quickly from one idea to the next, and they're very talkative, and they have a hard time focusing. They need to be grounded. So all the kind of aids for Vata are to ground them. And so for habit change, we have a habit map, we have a habit plan, and we have 4 levels of feedback, all really good for a Vata. The first level is, and this kind of coaching, self-coaching, where you keep a journal, self-reflection, you're keeping track, and that helps you. Then personal coaching, you get a buddy, could be your partner, could be anyone. It could be a professional coach, but that person checks in with you every day, once a week, and so that helps you. And then we also really recommend group coaching, call them learning circles, and there you get together a group of people, and
Now,
you're each
Keith,
trying to change a habit.
I know with Vata, this is great. They're creative. They're the creators. They like movement. They like,
Yeah,
changing one idea to another.
right,
And they hear about a new habit. That's wonderful, but they don't like being penned in.
right,
They don't necessarily like committing to things.
right.
And they've got the ideas, but the follow through is hard.
Yeah,
And sticking it,
they don't like a
and they get
daily
bored.
routine, but
So what's going to help
actually a
the
daily
Vata
routine
person?
is, sorry, they don't like a daily routine, but the daily routine is actually the best thing for them.
Absolutely, because a grounded and balanced Vata, wow, you got that superpower of creativity going. There's no doubt. It's just, flow is amazing. But how do we keep them with something that we know is going to be good for them? Because it's going to ground them. But they don't like being necessarily, they feel bored, they feel constrained.
Yeah, no, it's these, the having them make a habit plan where they, have some intention and then they pick an action. They create a cue or trigger to remind them to do the habit. They have a buddy to check in with, and then they have some reward that they reward themselves. So having them go through this procedure, and then these 4 levels, the 4th one I didn't get to, it's environment. For a Vata person, having a reminder, maybe a chart on the wall of their daily routine, having, just if they're going to exercise, just putting their shoes out by the door. So as they go by, oh yes, I'm, there are my sneakers. I'm going to go for a walk now. Again, it's just really simplifying it for them. And the buddy is huge for Vata. The group is huge for a Vata. They need all that extra help to do it. They're not a Pitta self-driven person. So every little thing we have in this that's like a toolkit is very, very valuable for a Vata. And, we understand that. So we want to make it easy for them. It may seem like a
And I love,
breeze for a Pitta.
yeah, I love the idea of reward or some kind of
Yeah.
reward for Vata. Because, they like fun, they like parties, they like
Yeah.
celebrations. So
Celebrate.
having,
Celebrating
and
is really important.
that's gonna give some variety in there too, that,
Yeah.
oh, if I do this drudge, they're gonna say, oh, I gotta do this. It feels like drudgery a little bit. We don't want it to feel like drudgery, so it's gotta be fun. I think for Vata, it's gotta be fun, and they may need to change it up a little bit, but stay on track. And having reward or celebration
Right.
and recognition, acknowledgement, and appreciation of what they're doing,
Exactly.
I think makes a lot of sense. What do you think?
Yeah. And I think the Kapha person, the Vatas and the Kaphas are the one that need the most help. The Pitta is the self-driven one. It's easier for them to do it. Their only
It
problem is
is,
doing
the
too much.
sneakers are already outside. The sneakers are already outside. They're
Yeah.
super competitive. They can't wait. They've got the list. They're checking it off.
Yeah, it's easy. And the Kapha, has sort of
But
an opposite problem to the Vata.
one thing about Pitta, though, they sometimes, if they don't see results, they're done.
You're right.
Okay, so let's look at something like meditation,
Right.
which we both know because we're meditators, that, meditation is something that in order to really realize the profound results of meditation in our daily lives, we have to have the habit and we have to practice regularly over time. And it
Right.
does take time. So Pitta, okay, I meditated for a week. Where's the results?
Yeah. That's an interesting thing. Now, the Transcendental Meditation Program, which is the one I think is the easiest to do, has a whole program where they put you through, 3 days of checking. I mean, it's personal instruction. You have a teacher, then it's, 3 days of going through with other people, and then a 10-day check. And then you always have that teacher that you can check in with. So it gives you a kind of a support for that. Now, I remember, giving a course out at UCLA, and there was one chemistry professor, and he said, well, I don't see any results, but people around me are telling me that I'm nicer. And, so sometimes people don't see their own results. But if they pay attention, they find that other people see the results. So I think it's good for a Pitta to be goal oriented. It's good for them to want to see a result. And that's why a lot of them don't stick with mindfulness or other meditations, because they aren't producing something. And TM is very, very clear about, that you will go through periods where you have spectacular results, and some periods where you're kind of purifying the body will be less. So there's a really good understanding, and Pittas are very intellectual. So having that understanding helps them. You need a program that is intellectually, it has the knowledge, it has the background that can support it. And then I think Pittas can be regular. Group meditations, like Bobby Roth has an online group meditation. That's great. Just being
That's a
aware.
great idea.
Yeah.
That's a great suggestion right there. Is they can join the group meditations and feel more connected, and maybe let go a little bit of their pit. I mean, with pittas, I think if there's changes that they really know they need to make sort of letting go a little bit of their pitta nature, their
Yeah.
drive to
Yeah.
succeed, their wanting immediate results, their impatience,
Right.
can actually be helpful to really implement the change.
Yeah, I think you're right. And so, for them, a guided meditation wouldn't work. They don't want somebody telling them what to do. That's not, maybe a Vata or Kapha would like that, but they're very self-oriented. And so having a complete program with knowledge and experience and a group and a TM teacher is really good
Keith,
for
e- excuse me for a moment, but I just realized my laptop is not plugged in. So I need to plug it in.
them. Okay.
But keep talking about that.
Yeah, and I think when you move, the next one that's kind of big is the kapha. And that almost no one pays attention to kaphas. And kaphas are the ones that are hardest to get to comply with habits. They're very fixed in their daily routine. So they need help. They really, really need a buddy. They really need a group. They really need someone in the environment to support them. So when you know that about a kapha person, then you can structure a situation for them that's good. Now, once they get started in meditation, they're pretty steady and they're pretty good about regularity. But in other areas of their life, where they're not sitting down and being quiet, they need a lot of help. They don't tend to get up. They can be couch potatoes. So they really have to get up. They really have to be doing more exercise. So for those habits, they need a lot more help. And again, joining a group that does exercise together, having a buddy that you can take walks with, all those things are super important for a kapha.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think really that's just really knowing, um, tuning in to, who the person is and, what their innate nature is, what you call energy state.
Right.
In Ayurveda, we call it dosha, essentially the same thing. Um, and it is going to make a tremendous difference in really getting these things to stick. Because we can read about these things, we can know they're good, but we don't do anything about it. Or
Yeah,
we start and we start and stop.
exactly. Exactly. And I think the co-creators who are working on this super you habit change program, they've got some other things they've added to it, which I think are very, very valuable. And it's, the one of the prime movers on this is Dr. Tony Nader, and he's very focused on consciousness. And once you understand the different levels of your inner self, and you realize that as you go deeper into consciousness, then you have a much greater chance to change the surface values of life. And Miriam Lodge and Heather Evans, they're also fabulous coaches. So this whole thing has been put into a very packaged program, I think, which is enormously effective. And if you take out any one component of it, it just doesn't work as well.
Yeah, and just repeat the title of the program again in
Superuhabits.com.
and it's a weekly program for a certain amount of weeks. Is that
Yeah,
essentially how
yeah,
they do it,
10,
or
10 programs. And my son, who's a professional coach, Ted Wallace, uses it in business, and
okay,
he's what they call an agile coach. So he's put a lot of
sure.
good additions in there. But essentially, it's a 10-week program, and you go through all the different stages of it, and they're elaborated much more than in the book. So it's just a much richer program. The book gives out the basics of it, but this is much
Great.
richer. A lot has been added
No,
to it.
no, that's cool. That's great. Superuhabits.com.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I know we just touched on the surface of the biohacks, super habits. But I think it was important really to bring in really the crux, the difference in implementing habit change that your book advocates versus other habit books.
Yeah.
And that is the personalized approach, knowing the person who's in front of you, who you're coaching, who you're working with, is really important. And that's where Ayurveda, as well as many of these habits are Ayurvedic, and take their roots in Ayurveda. But I think that's really a key component.
Yeah, and we could do a whole other podcast on the supplements. That's like a giant
Sure,
world of confusion. What
sure.
supplements could make you live longer? And I just
Well,
I am baffled. I don't know how people can manage because a new ad pops up every second promising enormous benefits, and none of them have been studied very well scientifically. So it's a maze that people have to walk through.
yeah, no, absolutely. I know we've got about 10 more minutes, so would like to highlight a couple of the other biohacks that
Sure.
you mentioned that I think are important. You talk about biohack number 7, which is the gut microbiome. Um, Hippocrates, all disease begins in the gut. Can we talk about the importance of this and how Ayurveda factors into this?
Sure.
Because I know
I
you have
think it's
you have separate books on this, but we could just
yeah,
touch
it's
briefly.
it's like it's also in this book. So it's like a hidden organ that nobody knew about because they didn't have the proper techniques to study it. Once they had gene sequencing, bacteria are aerobic. They grow, these bacteria anyway, they grow in an environment without oxygen. So it's very hard to study them. But when gene sequencing came along, we suddenly it revealed this huge population. Now it's interesting. In Ayurveda, they place each of the doshas in certain areas of the body as their main seat. So kapha is usually in the chest. And that makes sense because when people get an imbalance in kapha, they get this congestion. And so that's often in the chest. Pitta is usually located in the stomach digestive system. Again, that makes sense because pitta is fire. And so, that's where digestion is taking place. Vata is in the colon, and Vata is supposed to control the nervous system. It's supposed to control all transportation in the body. It's huge for the body. In fact, almost 80% of disease are started by a Vata imbalance. So how do you put that in the colon of all places?
I know.
So
I when I started studying Ayurveda, I had no idea why Vata was in the colon.
I
It's
know,
like, uh, the connection between the brain, essentially the nervous system, and the colon.
right.
And so it was just mind-boggling.
It
Say
is
more about it.
mind-boggling. But when
But
I
it
first learned
makes
about
perfect
them,
sense
yeah,
once you start really thinking about it and you know even experimenting with your own body in terms of what's happening.
yep. Yeah, so the microbiome answers so many questions, both ancient and modern. And almost every disease that's known has been connected to the microbiome. So it produces thousands of chemicals that get into the bloodstream, influence the brain, every organ in the body, immune system. So it's a huge regulator in the body. And we, not realizing this, doctors overprescribed antibiotics when we were kids. Anything you had, they gave antibiotics. And we now know that's like setting off a nuclear bomb in the gut. It just destroys lots of friendly bacteria and it's hard to get them back. So we're in a recognition now, even something like cesarean birth. You don't get the same, the initial formation of the gut isn't the same. And I mean, the gut bacteria. And those bacteria in the birth canal that usually seeds the microbiome of a new baby, so they have more allergies, they have all kinds of problems. So this is huge for the world, and there's many clinical studies on probiotics and diets. But what's interesting is the number one thing that changes the microbiome, and probably the most important thing, is diet. Whatever you eat will change it. You eat meat, you'll get a different
Yeah,
microbiome. You eat vegetables, you get a different microbiome. Those
sure.
bacteria feed on what you give it. You give tons of, high fructose corn syrup. Most of that fructose doesn't even get absorbed into the gut because we don't have enough receptors in the gut. Most of it goes right down to the microbiome. So you are culturing a whole different ecology in your microbiome, and you're feeding it something different. We know that gluten, lactose, in milk, sugar, all these things impact the microbiome enormously.
Yeah, I actually want to read this section of your book, or at least my summary of it from your chapter on the microbiome,
Sure.
because I think this brings in the Ayurvedic perspective, and that is in the stomach we have the Agni, which is our digestive fire, and we have the Ama, the poorly digested food, which causes toxins to go into the bloodstream and is a source of all disease or most disease. Um, You say it's the same in the colon microbiome because the microbiome is in our colon, and that is imbalanced dysbiosis. Then digestion will not be complete, and by the products of improper digestion and fermentation, they enter the bloodstream and cause problems. So I really want, just for our listeners, to know what the parallels are between the microbiome, what's called the microbiome today in modern medicine, and how Ayurveda viewed it.
It's hard to find it in Ayurveda, actually. I mean, when you actually microorganisms, there's a name for them, but it's the microbiome is not described specifically like that. What is described is that food is medicine, which really nobody understood. It wasn't even taught in medical school, the importance of food. So the microbiome validates this incredibly important principle of Ayurveda that food is medicine. The food changes the
Okay.
microbiome changes the body. So it
Yes.
is
Okay.
now a very clear support of why diet is so important in Ayurveda. And
Yes.
the intricacies are complicated because there's a world of probiotics, of billion-dollar industry. Nobody knows what any of those things do. It's like, one author described it sending Girl Scouts into World War II. I mean, there's so many microbiome that introducing a few probiotics, I don't care how special they are or what, may or may not help some people. Some people, probiotics, they get it from natural things, like whether it's lassi or, which is a form of yogurt, whether it's from fermented foods. But some people can take the cheapest probiotic and have a big impact on their health. Some people can take the most expensive, time released, because some of the bacteria will get destroyed in the stomach acid. So they're coated, all this perfect stuff, and they'll get no effects. So it's still a very uncharted territory. That's why I go back to Ayurveda, because Ayurveda implicitly understood the gut microbiome and gave a number of huge recommendations, which, as far as I can see, all support a healthy gut microbiome
Sure. Well,
without
I think just,
explicitly talking about it.
sure. Well, I think just in Ayurveda, Ayurveda says that 80% of all disease is a Vata disorder, and
Yeah,
Vata is in the colon,
yeah,
which is the location of the microbiome.
yes,
So Ayurveda, how many thousands of years ago, had already identified that this was an area that required special attention
absolutely.
and had a real significance for our health.
And Ayurveda has, simple things like diet. It's got many herbal supplements. It's, recommends meditation. It recommends exercise, different for every person. And it has very powerful detox programs called Panchakarma, which are very amazing ways of changing the microbiome. They are much more direct and much more powerful in making those changes. So it has a lot of different strategies for changing the microbiome. I mean, literally everything we do changes the microbiome.
Sure, absolutely. I know we're getting toward the end. Can you go for about 5 more minutes?
Oh, I'm fine. No problem.
Great. I want to talk about bliss.
Good. It's a nice thing to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. Um, in your book, you say that Ayurveda, and this is one of your Is this under happiness? I believe it is, yes. You talk about the biochemistry. One of your biohacks is happiness. So first of all, Ayurveda has what they call rasayanas, and specifically behavioral rasayanas.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I mean, again, it's common sense. I think everybody, when you look at these communities, blue zones where people live longer, there are lots of, you can say it's food, it's exercise, but it's also behavioral activities they do. There's a community, there's respect for the elders, they have certain practices they do. So modern science acknowledges that behavioral practices are important. And Ayurveda just understood this thousands of years ago and had, again, just common sense, giving respect to elders, giving, working together in a community, working, on relationships with a partner. There's so many amazing positive things that people took for granted for thousands of years, and they're not there anymore. We're just not doing them. We're just completely dysfunctional when it comes to basics. And so being reminded of these by Ayurveda is very valuable.
Sure. And how do you define rasayana? What's a rasayana?
Rasayana, is defined as something to improve health and extend life. And so there are herbal rasayanas that are, again, designed to improve health, but mostly just to extend life. And some of these have been studied extensively. And what do? I would guess they're like an epigenetic tool. They switch genes on and off, like the sirtuin genes are really important for longevity. So I think these rasayanas are ancient formulations that understood how to turn on these genes for longevity and turn off the genes for, poor health. But they really only work once you're in a healthy state. Ayurveda would say, first get into a healthy state, then take the rasayana. And then the behavioral rasayanas are kind of the mental. So there's the physical side and there's the mental side, and both are important.
Yeah, and it's yeah, absolutely. So rasayanas, happiness, bliss. You talk about the biochemistry of bliss. You say in your book that Ayurveda speaks of a substance called ojas, which is described as the finest product of digestion and a perfectly healthy digestive system. What's the significance? I live in the US, ojas. Why do I care?
Well, pretty much everything in terms of mental health and physical health now is described biochemically. What's interesting is that Ayurveda did this thousands of years ago. Now, we don't know what ojas is, but we do know that there are certain, like neurotransmitter like serotonin. When it gets out of balance, people get depressed. So there's a lot of drugs to try to keep it in balance. We know that there are things produced by the microbiome, chemicals that have an impact on your immune system, that have an impact on the brain. So everything comes down to chemistry. The fact that Ayurveda understood that there was this chemical called ojas and that it can improve, your physical well-being and your longevity is significant. And it's not one thing that does it. It's many different things that do it. But it's interesting. The two things that are emphasized most are stress in the digestive system, dysbiosis, which we call, and stress in the nervous system. If you can take away the stress in the nervous system through something like transcendental meditation, you can take away stress in the gut by giving it time to repair itself, having a better diet, so many different things there, exercise, so forth. Then suddenly the body operates more at a more optimal level, and it produces this biochemical, which it's like oiling a rusty, machine. Suddenly the machine operates better. And that's kind of what we need, is to do that. And we still don't know what it is. In my mind, it's the Nobel Prize to discover that. But everything else in our body is described in terms of biochemicals. So the gut bacteria produce thousands of chemicals. We just don't know which one of them is ojas. So that's a kind of a hunt for science to figure out what is ojas, how it works. Does it, it supposedly strengthens the immune system, the nervous system, and these are, reduce inflammation. These are key to longevity. So I think ojas is something we all want to find out what it is. But science is all in that direction. It's all as a description of the biochemistry of the healthy physiology or an unhealthy physiology. If your blood glucose levels are too high, it damages everything in the body. So you have to have the right chemicals at the right level. Otherwise, the body, it's very specific, the body, how it operates. And Ayurveda knew this, which is really cool. And that we can relate it to modern ideas is even more fun. And whoever finds ojas, I can't wait. I'm excited.
Yeah, and I know that when you and I spoke earlier, you have a new project that you're working on. Do you want to say a little bit about that? Your diabetes
Well, I'm
project?
really interested in diabetes because diabetes, again, it's one of those diseases that's about to take over the world. And there's a certain percentage of it now, but it's going up dramatically. And in indigenous people, Black Americans, certain Hispanic, its effect for some reason is even worse. And it gets passed on from one generation to the next, like the cells that, the egg cell, sperm cell can carry genes that then can affect the next generation. So these young kids are coming out with very serious diabetes. And, we know it's a big problem, but it's at the basis of almost everything. Cardiovascular disease is huge for cardiovascular disease. Alzheimer's, huge for that. All types of other diseases that are out there, it's a big factor. And it's just a dysfunction of our ability to regulate glucose. It's primarily, in my mind, there's hereditary factors, but this one guy, Licio Fasano at Harvard, says he thinks that diabetes 1 is caused by this leaky gut syndrome. Almost everybody would acknowledge that diabetes 2 is caused by bad dietary habits, lack of exercise, and stress. So these are all things, for diabetes 2, all things we can control, but people just rely on drugs, which lower the blood sugar, but they don't get the underlying symptoms. And I think this is where Ayurveda can make a huge contribution. And so I'm very interested in kind of exploring the Ayurvedic understanding of diabetes and how we can introduce, I think modern science is amazing. Continuous glucose monitoring is fabulous. You can know what's going on. You can actually figure out what your glucose, you take a walk, glucose goes down, meditate, affects glucose. This food affects it this way. So that combination, that integrated approach where you take the best tools of modern science and you combine them with the ancient knowledge of Ayurveda, I think you have a chance of really eliminating this really epidemic that's about to take over and cause havoc in the world.
And did you say you're in process of working on a book regarding
Yeah, I mean, I
diabetes?
always like a book for me is just a way of learning. So if I write a book, I learn more. So that's my learning tool.
Awesome. That's great. That's great. Well, Dr. Wallace, this was a wonderful opportunity to flesh out your books. Do you want to do you have a copy of your book there? Unfortunately, I have it on Kindle,
You
but I
mean
don't.
this one?
Oh, yes, yes. So actually, I'm losing it a little bit on the screen. That's great there. 16 Super Biohacks for Longevity, Dr. Robert Keith Wallace, shortcuts to a healthier, happier, longer life. So,
And if you go on my, name, Robert Keith Wallace, in Amazon, you can see all the other books that are there too.
Absolutely. So, well, thank you so much for your time. Really
And
appreciate it.
and there's a brand new book that just is coming out literally, in the last few days at the MIU Press, which is called
Yeah.
Living in Balance, um, with Maharishi Ayurveda. So it's really a good explanation of Ayurveda, all the basics of Ayurveda, and why Maharishi Ayurveda is unique. So that's another fun one that just came out.
Now, is that only going to be available on MIU Press? Will it also
Well,
be on
hopefully they'll
Amazon
get
as
it
well?
on Amazon soon.
Okay, but it's not currently for sale, but will be in a
Yeah,
couple of weeks or
yeah.
awesome. Yeah, that's a great one because there aren't enough books on the approach of Maharishi Ayurveda, so it's wonderful to have that out there.
And we also did another book on neurohacking for online learning. I like to biohack and I like to neurohack, but we can save that for another time. That's a very fun one.
That's a cool one. So if you don't mind hanging out for a few moments, I'd like to chat
Sure,
with you. Great.
sure.